Justin's been in the internet world a long time. He's been instrumental in other large companies. NetZero was one, right? So NetZero, anybody remember NetZero years ago, one of the first internet service providers? I thought it was a really cool company. He's seen this industry develop. He is now focusing on building tools for Bitcoin, and I think it's really cool. It's going to be big hand. He's also one of our sponsors, so let's give it up for Justin.
Hey, thank you, everybody. So my topic today is really talking about and going over some of the things beyond currency that we can do with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And it's not only things that are available and that we're able to do today, but kind of what are some of the things that we can do in the future. As Steve said, I had a career just over 20 years on the internet side of things. Spent that really a lot of it in the early commercialization phases of it, and trying to bring that into the mainstream. I've got to say, when I started working on the internet, I frankly expected to be working in the basement of a university somewhere, eating Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew and making like $18,000 a year. As it turns out, if you change the world, things may work out a little better for you than that. After a few years of doing that, though, the transformation had really happened, and it had been done. Access was out to a ton of people. There were communications protocols that really allotted a lot of peer-to-peer communication directly, and information was available. All these things of democratization of access and communication at a mass scale had really happened. And so what I tried to do was take a look at what would be the next kind of world-changing technology that I could be a part of. And after spending a few years playing around with clean technology, thinking that was going to be the thing, I came around and went to my first Bitcoin conference about 18 months ago. And it really resonated with me. It felt like the first days that I was going into the early internet stuff. And this was primarily for a few reasons. And I'm doing some of this background to talk about why some of the parallels between the early internet and what we're seeing in Bitcoin, and how that'll lead to some of the ideas around what Bitcoin can disrupt. So, what drew me to Bitcoin was what drew me to the internet, which was, here was a technology that democratized something that was previously highly centralized. Communication, at the time of the internet, I don't know if you guys remember, right? There was this Saturday Night Live skit where they had an operator who said, "We're the phone company, we don't have to care." And that was really what it was like, right? I mean, today we're dealing with things like net neutrality. Then you could only plug an approved telephone into the wall of your house, right? And the world has really changed since then, and it's because of a lot of the work that we did. And so in the way that we previously decentralized communication and information, Bitcoin democratizes finance. And it does it in a couple ways. The biggest way that it does it is it moves power from centralized institutions towards individuals, right? You and me and everybody in this room connect to the Bitcoin network with exactly the same rights and responsibilities and opportunities that Bank of America does or the U.S. government does. And that's never been true in any financial network in the history of mankind since currency was created, basically. What are some other parallels that I see that are pretty exciting? If I think about what the internet did in the early days, it did primarily, the biggest thing that it did is it eliminated borders from communication, right? 25 years ago, if you wanted to call somebody up on the phone that was like even in another county in the same state, it cost you a bunch of money, and so you only did it like once every few weeks or a month, and you would have these like long calls and all this sort of thing. And like now we jump on a Skype with somebody in China and we don't even think about it unless it's the middle of the night their time. And so for me, actually one of the ways that we'll know that kind of Bitcoin is won and that we've done some of the work that we need to do is when we have a room like this in 10 or 15 or 20 years, and many of the people in the room don't even remember when we thought about borders with respect to financial transactions, when it's like this thing from history that people don't even remember anymore. So what's Bitcoin going to disrupt? I heard someone a few weeks ago, and I wish I remembered who it was, that said asking what Bitcoin is going to disrupt today is like asking what the internet was going to disrupt in 1994. And, you hear a lot of naysayers out there right now that say, well, but the existing financial networks are better at this, or they're better at that, or they can do this that you can't do, or that you can't do. But let me step back and remind you of some things. 20 years ago, where we were when we tried to connect to the internet is you would spend like 5 minutes with squeaky modems and busy signals trying to connect to a service that would then allow you to spend 30 minutes to download one page of a newspaper that was 2 weeks old. The internet's done a pretty good job of disrupting the news industry since then. But anyone that was looking at it through the lens of what the technology was able to do that day or that minute wouldn't have seen that. They would have seen what was going on. The same is true with like phone and other things like that. And the other objections that you hear about Bitcoin is like, oh, well, we could drop the costs on transfer fees for international, or we could do this, or we could do that in the banking system. We heard exactly the same thing from the telecom companies. The telecom companies had an answer to the internet. It was like frame relay and ISDN. How many people in the room have an internet connection? A few? How many of you have an ISDN connection or a frame relay connection? Huh. Oh, you do? Awesome, Paul. No, right now. Today. No? Oh, man. I guess the internet won. Funny how that works. So some of the surprising things that you never would have thought of when you saw that text scrolling across the screen that have been disrupted are things like shopping, right? Not super surprising. Amazon was pretty early. How about like taxis and hotels, right? You would have never seen something where you're like, you're communicating in front of a computer is going to disrupt how you ride around in a car, right? But that stuff has all been totally changed. I mean, it's changed how we date. And that's pretty crazy, right? Walking up to somebody and starting a conversation to see if you like them is actually a pretty old school technology. It's been around for quite a while. And to think that something that's been like that embedded in the way that we work since we've existed as people, actually being changed because of a new technology, we're going to see the same thing here. So what are the things that we are going to disrupt now that we've gone through that background? I think some of these things are really easy to see, right? There's some things that are happening today. Remittance is one of them, right? We talked about how Bitcoin eliminates borders for financial transactions. There was just an announcement this week that by the end of this year, on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, NASDAQ intends to be trading stocks. And there's some pieces of that are decentralized that are riding on top of the decentralized Bitcoin blockchain. But it's still pretty impressive to see a market that's a multi-trillion-dollar market being disrupted in the first few years of a new technology. Loans and P2P are something that's coming up. That one's pretty obvious. If you want to loan money to a farmer in Africa from the United States, it's a lot easier to use it doing Bitcoin than trying to figure out how to get money there. Another one that's really exciting to me that I think we're just starting to see the beginning of right now is the opportunity for Bitcoin to really disrupt media. And let me talk about that for just a minute. So the internet, as I talked about before, really did disrupt media, news, all those kinds of things. In some ways, it wasn't in a really positive way. Because one of the things that's happened is we've ended up in a world where a lot of news and content sites, instead of creating great articles that really draw you in and provide a lot of value, they focus a lot of their energy on creating great headlines that make you click on them, and then less on what the value of the actual information is that they give you once you've clicked on the link. Well, Bitcoin has the opportunity to change that, which is really exciting to me. And the advertising model on the internet for media is really broken, right? When you go to a web page, they get like, if they're doing really well on advertising, they get like a quarter of a penny every time that you visit there. Right, and what that does is it does two things. One is they get paid based on you visiting there, not on you liking the content, which is one thing. The second is the amount of money that they get for it pushes you towards writing kind of short, junky, not well investigated content, because the amount of revenue you're generating that way isn't enough to pay for good reporters, for investigative journalism, for all those other sort of things. It's just not well supported in the mainstream. Imagine a world where we have effective microtransactions that are working, where I can easily send, using payment channels and things like that, a half a penny, a quarter of a penny, a tenth of a penny. And now I can go to a page, I can input into my web browser, here, if I'm paying less than this amount per page, just automatically pay the website. right? Get rid of paywalls, get rid of advertisements, do all those other things, right? I would pay half a penny a page to not see ads anymore. I would have a better user experience. The content site would double their revenue. And actually, to me, equally importantly, it would create a more authentic relationship between the content producer and the reader, because there's not this like third-party voyeur in the room that's paying for everything, and watching everything that you do while they pay for it. So I'm excited about that, both from a privacy perspective for individuals. I'm excited about it because it can rejuvenate our news media, which I think needs it, particularly on the investigative side of the world. And I like it because, again, it allows you to have that authentic connection, which I feel like is missing today. Copyright's another thing that's being disrupted by Bitcoin and the blockchain. There's several startups out there that are working in this space today where when you're going through the process of creating a new creative art, like a piece of music, or a document or something like that, you can use cryptography to basically take a encrypted picture of that document, basically a hash of it, and you can store that hash in the Bitcoin blockchain. And what you're able to do by storing that hash in the Bitcoin blockchain is you're able to prove that original document you had at that point in time. So this does two things for you. One is if someone accuses you of stealing their material, you can actually go through and provably show them what your entire creation process was. The second is if someone tries to steal your material, you can go back and prove that you had previous ownership of it. So this is actually a way for individuals to be able to protect and prove ownership of content that they're creating in a very low-cost way that doesn't require lawyers, middlemen, or other people to do the validation. They can be self-validating in a way that's provably true. Titles and deeds, similarly, there's a company in the space called Factum, and they're doing some work with a government, I believe it's down in Honduras, where with the land title office down there, there's potentially some fraud issues. Maybe not there, but in some places. And, what happens there is if you want like a really nice beachfront house, instead of going and paying the current owner of the house, you go and pay somebody in the land office to change the database, which is, yeah, it's pretty awesome. And so what they want to do is in order to create a better control environment around what they're doing, is actually write hashes of those titles into the blockchain. Because what that does is it creates a irreversible chain of proof of what ownership looked like, and doesn't allow people to go in and just change data behind the scenes in a way that's not auditable or trackable. Another piece that's interesting, and Chris talked about it a little bit earlier, is around identity and what's being done with identity. There's actually a lot of work in that space today. So I think a lot of us have talked about some of the challenges with current identity systems, in particular, that you can be dependent on others around it. And so there's a lot of experimentation going on today about ways that people can own their own identity and store that identity in the blockchain in a way that they control the rights and ownership around that data, but it's publicly provable. Much of that is actually still in the research phase today. It's work that's being done. There's challenges with putting identity in blockchains because of issues around if you want to share it with anyone, you have to publish it to everyone because of the openness of the public ledger. And so there needs to be some work around how you can both be decentralized, open, and sharing, but still protect user privacy. So a lot of work to be done in that area still, but I think it's an exciting technology for the future. This gives a really broad base of just some of the, supply chain. Sorry, I forgot supply chain. This one is one that takes place in a few different ways. This one's actually something that's being used in a couple different areas. One is around luxury goods or branded goods. So I don't know if many of you in the audience are aware, but even if you go into like a normal store, like a Best Buy or a Radio Shack or somewhere like that, for the company Beats a few years ago, 40% of the headphones that were being sold as Beats headphones, even through legitimate sources, were fraudulent. They had actually been fraudulently swapped out or introduced into the supply chain. So basically, these major retailers were buying fraudulent headphones and not knowing it, and much less the shops that were intentionally doing it. And so one of the things that's being looked at is basically anytime you produce like a luxury good or high value good that could be duplicated fraudulently, you create a digital token for it that travels with the device. So as the headphone or the box of headphones goes from Beats to the person who's transporting it to the local distributor in the country to the store to the everything, the digital tokens that identify those items actually move with it in a way that allows the consumer to know that they're getting an authentic item. There's similar work that's actually being done on the pharmaceutical side of the world where you actually have to track both pieces, right? You want to make sure the pharmaceuticals that you're getting at the pharmacist are real, right? If you're buying a drug, you want to actually get that drug, not another one. But they also, the pharmacy industry wants to be certain that if you're buying it, that you're actually supposed to buy it. And so there's some work being looked at that basically has tokens moving at each other from both sides. You have prescriptions moving up one side and you have pills moving up the other side. And then at the pharmacy, when they get shipped to you, they both get destroyed. And so it's a way to do authenticity both around prescriptions and around the pills that are being passed. Pretty interesting and exciting one. And, these are just a really small handful of examples. And, truthfully, as I lay these out, 20 years ago, I didn't see Uber or Waze or Snapchat or any of those things coming. And, I think that similarly true, it is nearly impossible today to see all the ways that Bitcoin and blockchain can potentially affect our lives in the future. But hopefully I've given at least a few ideas that people can think about to see some of the uses and activities beyond currency that will help lead to growth in this ecosystem. That's it. Any cues?
All right. Thank you. Give them a big hand, folks.